I mean, accusations in family court are common, right? The woman will call the man a narcissist, the man will call the woman lazy, and they kind of cancel each other out. And the judge goes, they're obviously mad and doesn't put any weight on either opinion, right?
Right.
So if the person is abusive and that's why you're leaving them, see and see if you can find objective third-party witnesses who are willing to come and testify on your behalf on that.
So, hello, everyone. This is Gretchen Baskerville, and I'm the author of The Life-Saving Divorce, Hope for People Leaving Destructive Relationships. And I want to talk to you today about the issue of money in divorce. And I've invited a wonderful guest, Ryan Bensen. He's from Canada, but he knows a lot about American law, to talk to us about divorce and money issues. He is a forensic accountant. He'd be the kind of person you'd want to hire if you have a business or if you are concerned about your spouse hiding assets. This is the man you can talk to. So today, Ryan, would you please tell a little bit about yourself, what a forensic accountant does? You are a CPA, what that means, and introduce yourself to my audience.
Hi, well, thank you first and foremost for having me today, Gretchen. And as you were saying, I'm a forensic accountant, which is somebody who will come into the court on your behalf as an independent expert and talk to issues such as calculations of income, business valuations, or exactly what you're talking about, finding the money. So I get to see many different things in my career and doing this kind of work, and I'm happy to talk to you about it.
Thank you so much. So I have a bunch of questions for you today. First of all, people kind of wonder, how did the pandemic affect the divorce rate?
It's a tough question to answer because what we've seen is a large sort of discrepancy in divorces from what you would have traditionally expected. So on the first part of the pandemic, so starting in March 2020, you would expect that the sort of pressure and the financial strain and everybody being at home at once and having kids screaming in the background like I have right now might lead people to divorce, but we actually didn't see that right away. And it seemed to galvanize relationships for a little bit where everybody was content sticking it out at home. And rather than divorce rates spiking immediately, we saw a delay when the restrictions started to relax a little bit. It's almost as if everybody had a chance to sit at home and see their significant other and come to a decision and say, when the risk of COVID starts to decline, that's when I'm going to pull the trigger and get out.
Yeah. So when you're talking about some relationships that are good are going to be galvanized. If they just were lacking in time together, being at home together might actually be a wonderful thing. I know it was for me and my husband. But for others, it exacerbates deep issues, and yet people will put it off. As you said, when the courts are closed, as they were here in the US, or delayed, or people really didn't know in early 2020 what was going on. And then they were worried about maybe the value of their house. Could they sell it? All kinds of things. So even if the marriage was bad, maybe there was abuse or something going on, they put it off because the alternative wasn't clear. It wasn't clear that they would get a good value for their house, or that the courts would even be open and ready to hear their cases. What do you expect for 2022? We're recording this on March 10th, 2022. What do you expect for the rest of this year and for next year?
I've seen an increase in cases generally this year and throughout 2021 from say 2019 even. And I'm expecting that trend to largely continue, unfortunately. I don't think, I mean, as much as we are through the issues with COVID, we're seeing the kind of sequelae from locking down the economy for a long period of time, printing money. We're seeing high levels of inflation, job issues, a war potentially abroad. All of these things add additional stress. And I think that as those stressors continue to heighten, as they seem to be, unfortunately, I think we're going to see more divorces for, the perceivable future. So probably from now until 2025.
Yeah, it's hard to weigh off the external stresses like inflation, money problems, war, just the tension in our societies right now, with
Mhm.
internal problems being caused by the reaction of the other spouse. Okay, so let's say that a person decides, I gave this marriage my best. There's something deeply wrong here. I usually in my private Facebook group, I'm usually dealing with the domestic violence victims, usually chronic emotional abuse, a lot of addictions, a lot of serial infidelity. So, how can a person best prepare for divorce financially? I also have to say, I just did a survey maybe about a week or two ago where I asked who filed. And I've got a lot of people in my group who identify themselves as an abuse victim, and they were the person who filed. So,
Mhm.
how can you help them prepare for divorce financially?
Your biggest issue financially typically comes from households where one person is the sole breadwinner. And typically, there's an entrepreneur who owns a business, right? In a hypothetical situation. And they're out of the house for the most part, running the business, and the other person is staying at home and taking care of kids or something like that. And what I tend to see is a fairly wide knowledge gap with respect to how money works, right? So
Yes.
what are the inputs and outputs of a business? How much money would it take to maintain the lifestyle that this person has become accustomed to, right? And that would be probably the first step for anybody in that situation where you don't know how, the money really works or the income works inside the family, is to start to go out and obtain knowledge on finance and accounting.
Okay.
And
And that's like understanding your budget, knowing how much income you've got, understanding what you're paying in electricity and gas and in insurance, all the things that maybe the person who isn't paying the bills wouldn't know.
yeah, exactly. I mean, often it's a matter of where somebody, knows that the credit card clears and they have cash in their purse or their wallet, but they don't know really what's going on beyond that. And you have to understand how tax works in America or in Canada, and you have to understand just the cost of living, right? And this is a good tool to have, because if you're going through a separation and a divorce eventually, you're going to be in that position anyway. You're going to have to know what a budget is, and you're going to need to know how much money you need to earn at the end of the day to pay the bills, right?
Right. And then you brought up something earlier that I think is really important. Some people are a little bit naive. They think that they can divorce and their lifestyle will go on as it has been, or that they're entitled to have their lifestyle go on as it has been. But the truth of the matter is, when you have to pay now for two homes or two apartments or two whatever, there's just no way the lifestyle can be at the same level. And so people need to brace themselves and be realistic about that.
Yeah, it dilutes the value of the household as a whole when you split it into two, right? Because
Yeah.
you're paying twice as much. And often I see in many cases where the person who doesn't own the business has sort of a very fantastic idea of what this business might be worth and how much money it's earning, when that really may not be the case or close to what reality is for a business like that.
Right. I mean, some of the people we're talking to are single income homes where uh, I'm just going to use a stereotype where the husband is the wage earner and he gets W-2 or 1099 wages, meaning that he's a normal kind of employee or a regular
Mhm.
kind of contractor. But you're talking specifically about a spouse or maybe even the couple co-owning a business, and one of them is really involved and understands the dynamics hey, even a 10% profit in a business could be, is actually pretty good. I mean, whereas the other spouse may think, whoa, this business earns, has gross revenue of $1 million a year. Hey, I must
Yeah.
be entitled to that. So um and I think that's a really important thing to bring up. So let's talk to both groups of people. The person, I have a huge number of homeschool mothers in my group. I actually have a lot of dads too, but they may have anywhere between, believe it or not, brace yourself, 5 to 12 children.
Hmm.
That's not uncommon in my group, and they've never worked. They may be educated. They may have do some small businesses on the side. What advice do you give them? In that case, if it's a W-2 or 1099, it's pretty easy to figure out what your spouse earns.
Yeah, I mean, if that's the case, if you're looking at a W-2 or 1099, then it's a matter of saying, here's the income, right? And this is what this looks like. There's not really a business to be concerned about with the valuation in that case. Generally, there aren't too many extraneous financial factors other than the fact that it's going to be a pretty substantial financial blow to cash flow. And that person who has been staying at home and homeschooling the kids, that may no longer be an option,
Yeah.
right? To pay the bills, and that's very difficult for people to swallow, right? That they've been out of the workforce for so long, and they've enjoyed this, really remarkable time doing um, the right things for their children, and they're going to get peeled out of that potentially, right?
Yeah, it's very painful for so many of the people in my group to say, uh-oh, the reality is I have to go back to work. How am I gonna develop, any kind of work skills? And we talk about that a lot in our group, rebuilding your resume, your cover letter, and how do you turn life experience into job skill. Now,
Yeah.
if a person really does have, there's a business that your business owners, or one partner, one spouse is a business owner. Do you recommend that they get a couple of appraisals, or how does that happen?
I mean, generally one should do. I mean, typically in many cases, especially if the business is a really substantial asset, or there are very significant questions about the income someone is earning, usually each spouse will end up hiring an expert, right? And it turns into sort of a battle of the expert situation, which is expensive
Mm.
and not overwhelmingly helpful to the process as a whole, because it takes a lot of time and money to do it.
Well, probably in Canada, as in United States, most small businesses are under 1 million. I'm not going to hold you to this, but what could a couple expect to spend on an appraisal of $1 million business? And when I say $1 million, I'm saying a gross revenue of $1 million. I know that there are
Yeah.
multipliers for like software companies and things like that.
That's a great question to ask. And I mean, truthfully, most businesses are kind of the same in the sense that whether or not you have a software company or a manufacturing company or a professional services firm, they're all going to be relatively consistent in the sense that you have clients and you have revenue and you have expenses, right? So the business is going to operate in a certain way, and valuing each one specifically is just a matter of determining what the risk elements are within the business and going through the financials to understand what, realistically this business can earn on an annual basis going
Now,
forward.
how does a person find such a person,
Well, they call
such an
me.
expert? They call you. Absolutely.
uh, an expert in this case, the keywords are going to be forensic accountant, or in the US, the designation is an ABV, which I have, which is a
ABV like Victor. Okay.
yeah, ABV like Victor, which is accredited business valuator.
Ah,
So
good. Okay.
somebody, and you want to hire somebody with experience in court who, especially if it is going through litigation, who can talk through these issues and turn a potentially complex problem into one that is relatively simple to understand. So the
Great.
people reading the report and listening to someone like me should know what I'm saying.
Yes. Yeah. So it needs to be someone who can relate to non-accountants and explain it well in court. Excellent. Okay. My next question. I've got a lot of people who say, I am so destitute financially, I can't even afford a retainer for an attorney. What advice do you give a pro se filer?
This is tricky. And it's going to depend on, really, is it the woman or the man going through the divorce? Because each, in my experience, has a different sort of angle on how to talk about things. But from a holistic perspective, you're representing yourself, right? And you need to recognize that you're now filling two roles, right? One as the applicant in the divorce, or the respondent going through the process, and the other as the attorney, which means you need to find a way and work through playing the role of the attorney and taking an honest to God look at your situation, what's happened, the facts and the evidence, and assessing it unemotionally, and being able to describe that to the court.
Now, when you
And
say that, I think that people in my group often make the mistake that their own reporting of an incident will be taken seriously by the court. But you're saying think like an attorney, which means you need evidence.
mhm.
And oftentimes you need third party neutral evidence. And for some people, that's going to be hard to come by, but you need to find that if you can.
Yeah, because I mean, accusations in family court are common, right? The woman will call the man a narcissist, the man will call the woman lazy, and they kind of cancel each other out. And the judge goes, they're obviously mad, and doesn't put any weight on either opinion, right?
Right.
So if the person is abusive, and that's why you're leaving them, see and see if you can find objective third party witnesses who are willing to come and testify on your behalf on that,
Yeah.
who will be able to keep their cool on the stand, which is a skill by itself.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. They need to come across as neutral and objective. And I think it's you brought up something really important. You need to look good on the stand. You can't be losing your cool on
mhm.
the stand. You can't, you need to show yourself as being a sensible, reasonable person with self-control. And those things are going to be really important if you're representing yourself.
Yeah, and it's very difficult. And I actually know somebody who trains people in exactly that, and does stand training for people, just to get them outside of the box of emotion and into the box of being able to talk about something objectively without going off the rails, right? And that's a difficult thing, and the training is warranted. The secondary, I'm going to give some non-standard advice.
Great, we'll take
But
it.
I have had this conversation before. If you're filing and you're a pro se filer, you need to get your life, as broadly as I can put it, put together, which means diet, exercise, get rid of alcohol, get rid of drugs, get rid of all these other kind of negative implications. You have enough stress going on in your life. This is not the time to become an alcoholic.
Right.
This is the time to clean everything up and get a clear head, because these things are only going to cloud your judgment, right? And to the extent that you can, I would highly, highly recommend doing that.
Yeah, and I think it's important to say I interviewed a paralegal just a few months ago, and she said, if you need to be on medication, be on medication. That does not count against you. In fact, it shows that you're taking responsibility for your life and you're trying to put your life together. So that's important too. I'm
Mhm.
not, by the way, giving anybody in the audience any legal advice here, but if you go back through my YouTube channel, you'll find my interview with paralegal Laura Lee Hauser. Anyway, keep going. I think it's important what you're saying. If you're doing drugs or alcohol, get off them now, because I get that what you're going through is painful, but you need to look as good as possible in court.
Yeah, and it's a great opportunity. I mean, you have a chance to reset, right? And you've been involved with an abusive husband or a terrible wife, or whatever the case may be,
Yeah.
hit the reset button and get to work on some things that you can control. And that's going to help to bring some credibility to the table as you undergo that process.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, another question. How do you find hidden assets? There's a lot of people in my group who suspect that there are secret bank accounts, that the bonuses are going into bank accounts that they have no knowledge or access to.
Mhm.
I have a lot of people who actually say, I've never been given a credit card to what I know is a joint account. I don't know the password even to our joint bank account. What do you recommend to people like that?
Disclosure. It's starting to get into the realm of financial abuse at that point, right? And one of the key ways to combat that as an expert is disclosure. So it boils down to, we need to get the bank statements, we need to get the credit card statements, then we need to understand the money coming in and the money coming out. And that's where you start to see discrepancies, because if you see a $10,000 bonus that doesn't clear the joint account, it's going somewhere, right?
Right.
So that would be step one. The other way to look at it and to assess if there's an issue here, which is sort of the last step measure, is if you don't get the disclosure, the person's stonewalling you for whatever reason.
And by the way, when you say the word disclosure, you're meaning a legal requirement to disclose what they have.
Correct.
We're not talking that you need to go to your spouse and say, tell me what's in there. No, the court will actually require them to disclose all of their accounts, correct? At
Absolutely.
least here in the
Absolutely.
US. Okay, all right.
Yeah, absolutely. And as they should, right?
Exactly.
But sometimes that gets stonewalled, unfortunately. So the last measure step that you can run through is something called a lifestyle analysis, right? And what that means is, if you've got 2 Porsches in the driveway, a 5,000 square foot house, 3 kids attending private school, you went to Turks and Caicos last year, and all of these expenses are adding up, and yet your husband or your wife is declaring $20,000 in income and they're the breadwinner, quite factually, that this is nonsense. This doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And that's when you can add up these expenses over the course of the year and say, this is how much it would take to earn it on an after-tax basis.
Oh, that's an
Right?
interesting thing. Yeah,
So you back
absolutely.
into it. Yeah. So you back into it rather than going through the details. You say it would cost $200,000 per year after tax to live this lifestyle, which means on a pre-tax basis, you'd need to earn, I don't know, 300,000.
Right, right,
Right. So that's
right.
closer to reality.
And do the judges listen to that?
They will. They will.
Okay,
Yeah.
good.
It
I
can be
mean, that's
persuasive.
great. Yeah, it's important. Okay, another question. So, what do you do if you suspect your spouse has filed inaccurate information on the taxes? And that's kind of part A to my question. Part B is, you either signed or you refused to sign, because once you sign joint taxes, married filing jointly, you're on the hook
Mhm.
with at least in the United States with the IRS. They'll come after
Mhm.
both of you. So what do you do if you think that the taxes are not accurate?
The IRS and Canada's revenue agency love to read court decisions on inaccurate tax returns and marital law. So they often say the first person to come to your house after a divorce is the IRS.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, it's a sad truth, but they get to see things that many people do not. One of the issues that you have to consider here is, are the expenses completely inaccurate, or is there sort of a shade of truth to some of these things, right?
Mm.
So some people will, or really most entrepreneurs, will take expenses that are somewhat personal in nature, right? So they'll go to Walt Disney World and they'll take their kids and their wife or their husband, and they'll expense the whole trip. And they're going for a conference for a few days, but they stayed for a week, right? So they expense the whole trip. Fine. There's a personal nature to that expense though, and the IRS would like to know about it. So you've got an issue there. You have a potential tax liability that might be coming up fairly quickly if that's the case. So, I mean, overall, the recommendation is you want to make sure that returns are filed accurately, right? And you understand the numbers behind what's on this piece of paper on a tax return. That means you might need to hire somebody like me to go through the tax returns, ask for invoices, ask for the general ledger and financial statements of a company, and start to do that sort of analysis. But by the same token, it can be a bit of a catch-22 if you're, stuck holding the bag for some of these inaccurate tax returns.
Yeah. Yeah. Now you can, what if you know, and you just, so I've had a couple things happen. I've had some spouses, men or women, refuse to sign. Sadly, those same people have discovered that their signature was forged on the tax return. What do you do in that case?
Document the fact that you're not signing, right? So it's
Okay.
not enough to say, I didn't sign it. You should be able to, or ideally be able to provide some sort of evidence to that. So
Okay.
if
So
it's
maybe you
an
even send an
email,
email to
yeah,
your spouse saying, I'm not going to sign this. I don't believe half of these numbers, or I don't believe the number on line, 1A.
mhm.
Would that be effective documentation, or copying in your CPA or your tax advisor?
It's going to help, definitely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
And I would
So,
even go so far in the email just to box off a concern for later, which would be, I will only sign this in the presence of a witness after, after receiving enough evidence that these numbers are accurate, right?
okay, that's a great idea, in front of a witness. Okay.
Mhm.
As long you've got to put it in writing, and you've got to make sure that that really happens. Good.
Yeah, because that takes away that forgery example, because the other person could easily just say, yeah, they put that in an email, but they signed it the next day. We had a talk and she signed it the next day, right?
Got
No,
it.
no, no.
Got it. Yes. Okay.
Let's get
I
a
see how
witness.
that closes that little loophole. Um, for those, okay, we've already kind of talked about, for those who own a business with their spouse, what tips do you offer? I kind of put question number 7 near the, the front.
That's
um,
okay.
let's, yeah. All right, Ryan, I know that we have talked about all kinds of things, but as a forensic accountant, you see other topics that I haven't even brought up. Give us some other insights that you think would be helpful.
There's so much, right? And one of the things that does come to mind is, and I don't think we quite got there when we were talking about it earlier. What tips do you give to people who own a business, right, on how to prepare financially for divorce? One of your biggest problems is going to be cash flow, because you've got a community property division issue, you have a alimony and child support issue, and if you own the business, you have a very large risk associated with the business valuation, right?
Right.
Because if that's being included in property, you're going to have to pay a certain component of that value to your ex-spouse, right?
Yeah.
That's a huge preparation point for people, because they don't quite understand what that means from a cash flow perspective. And I've seen it. It can bury a business and bury the business owner personally and permanently in some cases.
Right. And
And
what you're saying, let me put this into the standpoint of the person who's not the business owner or not involved in the business. If if the divorce destroys the business, you've just killed the goose that lays the golden egg. So it's really important to evaluate this business properly. Go on.
yeah, and it's critical, because if you have, let's say you have a house, right? And things have been going well. You have a house and it's worth $2 million, right? So let's just assume we're going to split it 50-50 and call it a day. So the wife will take the house in this example. Then the business is worth, say, $10 million, right? So, and again, we're going to split it 50-50. So we have an issue where the house has been divided. So the husband has paid the wife effectively $1 million because of the value. But now he has to come up with the remaining, well, there's half of 10 million, which is 5 minus 1. So he needs to come up with $4 million on a payment.
Right.
If the company is over leveraged already, we're in big trouble here, because if he can't obtain financing to make these payments, we have a major problem. And if the profit of the company isn't there, if there's any sort of downturn, which often happens with divorces, sometimes legitimately, often enough, and sometimes not, we have a major problem here that needs to be addressed. And as the business owner, you have to be ready for that, which means getting your ducks in a row, having a business valuation that is appropriate so you don't need to sell it if push comes to shove, and trying to obtain whatever external financing you can to help make this ending payment.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because most business owners, and most of my audience doesn't realize this, but I was an entrepreneur for much of my adult life, and I owned a business. And when I went through a divorce, just the emotions, you know, when you're crying at your desk for, an hour every day, your business is not running great. And yet you need that business income to keep a roof over your head and food on the table. And so there are emotional aspects, but then you have to brace yourself for the financial aspects. How are you going to handle the cash flow of paying another person? And yet paying for your inventory, your employees, all the other kinds of overhead to keep that business alive. So what do you recommend? How do
Sometimes
you
it's bringing
prepare?
in a partner. Sometimes it's obtaining external financing to get there. Most appropriately would be to get an accurate valuation on the business that doesn't inflate it, but doesn't deflate it at the same time. And sometimes as the business owner specifically, it might be better just to come to the table and say, look, I want you to be comfortable. You get the house, if you want, more or less full custody of the children, that's fine. Obviously, I want to be able to see them and have access and take care of them too. Let's give you, what you need to live comfortably. And we've got to get the business value, but let's work on a plan over time to make this work, right? Because
Yeah.
I won't be able to make a balloon payment at the start.
Right, right. And you hinted, I'm this is just a little tangent here. You hinted about, wanting to see the children. Of course, my group is all about every fit parent should have absolute custody, joint custody with the spouse. And if you're fit and you're protective, absolutely, we want, children have the right to love both parents.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but if you kill the goose that lays the golden eggs, that business, everybody gets hurt, including the kids. So I get what you're saying. So when you say outside financing, are you talking about bank loans, bringing on a larger partner, venture capital, that kind of thing?
Yeah, selling a portion of the business, potentially bring in a partner, venture capital, bank loans, anything that you can do in advance to help that situation, or at least get the ducks, started to get in a row before this is happening. It will be helpful, right?
That's great.
Because then if push comes to shove, you can at least go down that avenue. And if you're not prepared for it, you're really in deep trouble. It would be, yeah, I mean, I think in any of these cases, it's better to address it up front and just say, look, I mean, here's the situation. That candor can be lost in the litigation process because people are fighting a fight that's very emotional, and lawyers can get involved, and there's miscommunication in the process too. So
yeah, when people are very, very spiteful, they're not thinking. And kind of the big question becomes, where are we going to get the money if the company goes bust? you
mhm.
know um so that's one more element that needs to be taken seriously. And I realize that there's a lot of mistrust in divorce situations. I mean, if they wouldn't be getting divorced, at least the people in my group for the most part wouldn't be getting divorced if the other partner, husband or wife, was trustworthy, honest, faithful, um, you know, respectful, safe, and decent. But it does make it really, really tough. But I think what you're showing us, you're painting for us, is a path to what it ought to look like, or what you should aim for if you can. What else?
Yeah, and one component of that is, how do you model that path, right? So I was fortunate to see as a kid, when I was quite young, my dad. I'm from a second marriage from my dad, and he went through a very very nasty divorce with his ex-wife, and I saw bits and pieces of that when I was a young child. So I saw the bad. And one of my very close friends when I was young, his parents split when we were probably 5 or 6. And they had a tremendously successful divorce, to the fact that it almost seems unreal in today's circumstances. They were extremely cordial with each other. Birthdays with the kid were always together. Christmas together, Easter together, Sunday night dinners together. It was remarkable, the difference between the two. So the path that you want to aim for is the latter. You want to be on speaking terms with your spouse, even though, he might be an abusive ass, if I can say that.
Sure, you can say that.
That may be the case, but for the better, nature of your children in the long run, it's going to be helpful to try to find a way to work around that emotion that, is immediately here and maybe well warranted, right?
Yeah. I mean, what you're saying is co-parenting is an option for some couples. They actually can hold, both people can be respectful for a fixed number of hours. And that would be, our ideal. And a lot of people can't. And we call that in our group parallel parenting, where, it's just kind of better if you just stay in your own,
Yeah.
locations and don't have any interaction at all. And certainly don't let the children see you fighting, even though you may have to hold your ground in court to get what, your fair share, half usually, and at least in my state in California.
Mhm.
But yeah, no, I like your story, and where it's possible for both parents to behave well in each other's presence, that would absolutely be the ideal.
Yeah, I mean, that's the perfect ideal. I recognize that not many people get there, but it's something that you can plant in your head if you're going through this, to say, here's what I would prefer this to end up as, right?
Yeah.
And if you have that destination in mind, maybe your way of approaching things might just change a little bit to make a portion of that become more realistic.
Yeah. I'm my husband's second wife, and in his divorce, uh, 45 years ago, um, he basically, he and his wife agreed. She had been from a divorced home, and she had seen her parents do a lot of fighting. So what they agreed to is he would give her the house entirely, and she would never ask for another child support payment ever again.
Yeah.
And they would, their daughter would, you know, come and spend time with him. Very, very well laid out. And the goal was, we just want to make this as peaceful as possible. And so that's what he did. He handed her the house. She never asked for another dime. And they ended up raising a delightful daughter. I have a wonderful 40-year-old stepdaughter who's just an absolute gem. But a lot of that was because they were able to agree, one and done. And I realize one size doesn't fit all. That's not the solution for everyone, but it worked for them. So.
Yeah, and it's tricky. I mean, obviously, as somebody who's involved in the financial end, I see a lot of the financial issues that come up, and the allegations that are raised about, just like what we've been talking about, hidden bank accounts in the Cayman Islands. And I've heard money laundering, illegal casinos, mafia,
Mm.
hidden assets, hidden accounts. The big one is going to be cryptocurrency. That's sort
Oh,
of on the
wow.
horizon now,
Okay.
on how to find cryptocurrency, because it's becoming more and more valuable, and it's extraordinarily easy to hide because it's generally anonymous.
Okay.
Um, so that would be the one, real area of concern that I personally have over the next decade in this field is, where do we find cryptocurrency and what's the most effective way to find it? Because it's more common and it's valuable.
Now, our taxing agencies, both in Canada and the United States, are getting better and better at finding this kind of thing. Is that a fair assumption?
Not really. It's yes and no. So the way it's been working so far, the IRS and the Canadian Revenue Agency, um, they don't know how to find it,
Mm.
right? Other than by leveraging the exchanges. So whether it be Coinbase or whatever, I'm not very well versed in the different exchanges, whatever the exchange might be, into know your client, anti-money laundering type legislation. So by doing that, that means that these companies are becoming tax compliant and therefore forcing the income to be reported to the IRS or to a tax authority. But
Interesting.
in cracking, who owns what where, the IRS currently has no clue, other than it has bounties out for millions upon millions of dollars for people to try to figure it out.
Wow. Okay. So that's really interesting because I'm also weighing that off with the Department of Justice going after ransomware
Mm-hmm.
um, perpetrators
Mm-hmm.
and catching them through Bitcoin. And this is way outside of either one of our knowledge, but it's interesting. And I think you bring up something really important, and that is that we need to watch this in the future and really keep an eye on it and see what the developments are.
Yeah,
Um,
it's gonna be a funny one, because I think it's a matter of when, not if, that the IRS will crack it. And when they do, the way that cryptocurrency works is that the history of that, bit or coin or whatever you want to call it, is there permanently, right? So you can trace where it's been for the whole time.
oh,
So if they can
interesting.
start pegging names and social security numbers to these different accounts, the people who had it today, when they crack it in 10 years from now, are going to get hammered by the IRS, and potentially rightfully so if they didn't declare it on their tax return.
So hopefully
Um,
there will be justice.
yeah, one day.
What else? Any other topics?
Hmm. Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I think we've covered a lot, and if you'd like to have me back on anytime to cover more, I'd be more than happy to.
Oh, I would love to have you. You come from such a great perspective. You've seen it both ways. You've got clients who've handled it well and handled it really probably very poorly. So I really appreciate your insights for us today. I will list your contact information in the show notes. And then you mentioned that you had another expert. Yes, prepping people on the stand. That's what it was. Okay, I won't cut this out. Thank you. And if you're willing to share that person's information, I'll put that in the show notes too.
Yeah, I'd be more than happy to. He's a great guy and very experienced in these things, and can certainly help people get used to opening up, and get them help in understanding sort of the flow of questions that may arise. And for me personally, if anybody has any questions that may arise from this and have been watching, you please feel free to reach out. I'm not going to charge you if you send me an email or something. I'm more than happy to talk to you.
All right. Thank you so much for your time, Ryan. I truly appreciate it. Have a
Thank you for
wonderful
having me.
day.
You too.
If you benefited from this recording, you will find support and clarity in my book, The Life-Saving Divorce, available in paperback or Kindle on Amazon, and in 2022 as an audiobook. You can also follow me, Gretchen Baskerville, on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Instagram. You can sign up for my email list at lifesavingdivorce.com. Women and men of faith may request to join my private Facebook group, Life Saving Divorce. For more on life-saving divorces, please subscribe and click the link to the next recording.